Today, we come together not because the world is at peace, nor because humanity has found all the answers, but because deep within each of us, there is a shared feeling one. It is difficult to name. Unease. This unease does not necessarily come from illness, nor solely from lack or deprivation. It arises because something within the mind is unsettled, fatigued, no longer standing as firmly as before. The outer world is changing very quickly, faster than the human mind can adapt. And within that gap, tension arises, fear arises, doubt arises, and from there, much silent suffering takes shape. We are living in an age where humans know a great deal. We understand the structure of matter. We can measure extremely small particles. We can connect with one another across oceans in an instant. And yet, at the same time, we find ourselves helpless in the face of our own emotions. A single piece of bad news, an image, or a careless remark can unsettle the mind for an entire day, sometimes many days. We can send a message across great distances, yet we do not know how to soothe ourselves when anxiety arises. In moments like these, it is easy to believe that the problem lies outside of us. We think that if circumstances were different, if the world were less unstable, if people were kinder, then our minds would be at peace. But if we observe closely, we will see that some people live in extremely difficult conditions, yet remain steady, clear, and capable of love. And there are others who have everything, yet their minds are constantly uneasy, tense, and fearful of loss. This shows us that circumstances are not the whole story. When a threat appears, fear is the natural human response. Fear is a survival reflex. There is nothing wrong with that. The problem begins when fear no longer stays at the level of alertness, but spreads, lingers, and occupies the entire space of the mind. At that point, fear no longer protects us. It weakens us. It disrupts sleep, tightens the body, narrows thinking, and makes us quick to look for someone to blame. And very often, this fear is no longer tied to reality, but lives on images, assumptions, and stories we create in the mind. If we pause for just a moment, only a moment, and observe the mind during anxious times, we will notice something quite interesting. Fear rarely speaks about the present. It speaks about the future, about what might happen. It projects, imagines, and makes what has not yet arrived feel vividly real. When we fully believe in these images, the body reacts as if danger were right in front of us. The heart races, the breath shortens, the mind contracts. This is not anyone's fault. This is simply how the untrained human mind functions. For centuries, humanity has focused intensely on understanding the external world, while paying far less attention to understanding how the mind creates experience. We are accustomed to changing circumstances, but we are rarely taught how to change perception. So whenever crisis appears, we look for external solutions, new tools, new systems, forgetting that there is one factor present in every situation: the mind that is experiencing it. One thing must be said clearly to avoid misunderstanding. Speaking about the mind does not mean rejecting science. It does not mean dismissing medicine, nor turning away from reality. On the contrary, understanding the mind allows us to cooperate better with science and to use external knowledge more wisely. When the mind is panicked, even correct information becomes a burden. When the mind is more stable, we gain the capacity to discern, select, and act wisely. What we are witnessing is not only a health crisis, but also a crisis of human connection. As tension increases, boundaries between us and others become sharper. Differences that are simply natural diversity are transformed by the mind into threats. From this, suspicion arises, blame arises, anger arises. And within that spiral, very few people remain calm enough to ask a simple but essential question: what is truly happening in my mind right now? If we look back at human history, we will see that the most turbulent periods are also the times when humanity is forced to mature inwardly, not through force, not through control, but through deeper self-understanding. Each era asks a different question, and perhaps the question of our time is not how to control the world better, but how humans can avoid losing themselves in a world that is too fast, too vast, and too complex. In this context, turning back to observe the mind is not an escape, it is a very practical act. When we understand how emotions arise and how thoughts carry us away, we begin to have space for choice. We no longer have to react immediately. We can pause. And within that very small pause, a great deal of suffering can be stopped before it spreads. Perhaps we do not need many new concepts. Perhaps what is more necessary is to rediscover what has been neglected. Humanity has advanced far in caring for the body, but care for the mind remains rudimentary. When the body hurts, we know to see a doctor. When the mind hurts, we often endure silently or try to fill the pain with busyness, consumption, or distraction. But the mind, like the body, needs to be understood, cared for, and trained. When it comes to training the mind, the essence is not becoming someone else, but seeing more clearly what is already happening. Seeing fear as it arises, seeing anger before it turns into words or actions, seeing the connection between ourselves and others, even at its earliest stages. When this clarity is cultivated consistently, it gradually changes how we live in the world. There are times when we think the problems are too big, that one individual cannot make a difference. But all large transformations begin with very small shifts in how people see and respond. When one person is less fearful, less extreme, less closed off, the shared space becomes a little easier to breathe in. And these small changes, when they spread, can create differences that cannot be immediately measured. So before searching for solutions far away, perhaps the first thing to do is to return and look directly at our own minds without judgment, without rushing to fix, simply to understand. To understand that much of what we call external crises is actually amplified by the way our minds receive it. And to understand that if healing can begin anywhere, it begins right here, within each person's lived experience in this very moment. What we need to examine first is not what is wrong with the world, but how the human mind is operating within it. Because the same circumstances, the same events, produce very different reactions. Some panic, some remain calm, some collapse, some stand firm. This difference does not lie in the amount of information or intelligence, but in the stability of the mind. We often speak of medical crises, social crisis, economic crisis, but if we observe carefully, we will see a repeating pattern across all of them. The human mind is being pushed into overload. Too much use, too many assumptions, too much uncertainty. A mind accustomed to continuity and predictability is now forced to live in prolonged uncertainty. When uncertainty is not understood correctly, it turns into fear. Fear itself is not the enemy. Fear is a natural mechanism for protecting life. But fear is useful only when it is brief and linked to appropriate action. When fear becomes prolonged, without an outlet, without being illuminated by understanding, it begins to erode from within. It disrupts sleep, shallows the breath, narrows perception until only danger remains visible. From there, extreme reactions arise not because people have become worse, but because the mind no longer has enough space to hold reality. Many believe that more information, more warnings, more analysis will reduce panic. Yet, reality shows the opposite. When the mind is unstable, information does not soothe fear, it multiplies it. Every number becomes a threat. Every projection becomes a dark scenario. A mind untrained to distinguish possibility from reality begins to live more in imagined futures than in the present moment. This is crucial to see. Most anxiety does not arise from what is happening, but from what we think will happen. The human mind can travel far into the future, yet it is rarely taught how to return. And so, in crisis, the mind leaves the present, the only place where action is possible, and drifts into endless speculation. That is where life energy is consumed the fastest. If we look even deeper, we will notice something more subtle. When fear dominates the mind, people begin to seek a sense of control. And the easiest way to create that sense is through blaming a group, a system, a nation, a belief. Finding an external cause brings temporary relief, but it is short. What follows is division, tension, confrontation, and increased collective suffering. This is why many social problems intensify during crisis, not because they are new, but because latent tendencies in the human mind are activated simultaneously. In stable times, biases, anxieties, and anger can remain dormant. Under prolonged stress, they surface, and without the ability to observe the mind, people confuse inner reactions with objective truth. Speaking of the mind is not speaking of something vague. The mind is not an abstraction. It shows itself concretely in how we breathe, how we sleep, how we respond to bad news, how we look at others in disagreement. An unstable mind not only creates discomfort but directly affects the body. Chronic stress weakens immunity. Fear disrupts the nervous system. Anger drains energy. This is no longer belief. It is increasingly confirmed by modern science. And yet there is a paradox. Although we understand that the mind affects health and behavior, modern education and life rarely teach people how to work with the mind. We are taught how to use tools, but not how to use ourselves. We are taught how to solve external problems, but not how to recognize internal reactions. So when major upheavals occur, people have very few inner skills to rely on. If we are honest, many things we say we cannot endure are not unbearable because circumstances are too harsh, but because the mind has already been depleted. A mind that is exhausted, unheard, and unrested collapses easily under added pressure. When many individuals reach that state, society itself becomes fragile. So the central question of this time is not how to eliminate instability, because that is unrealistic, but how to cultivate a mind with enough space and resilience to move through instability without harming oneself or others. When the mind can pause, even briefly, before reacting, everything changes. Not because the world becomes simpler, but because we are no longer swept away immediately. That pause may be only a single breath, yet it creates a profound difference. In that pause, we can recognize this is fear. And simply by recognizing it as fear, rather than absolute truth, its intensity already begins to shift. This leads to a crucial realization. Crisis does not only test external systems, it tests the inner maturity of humanity. When the mind is untrained, crises exposes fragility. When the mind has grounding, crisis becomes a difficult phase that can be passed through.